It's your girl, Nancy Red, and this is season 3 of Mompreneurs, where we celebrate beautiful Black entrepreneurs who are also amazing moms. Now, each week we chat with guests about how they're killing it simultaneously as a business mogul and a mom. We listen to their life stories and inspiring advice. So, Monique, Erica's background is more behind the scenes, and also obviously with tangible product. How would you classify your entrepreneurship within the entertainment industry? So, kind of more people and artist oriented, right?
I would just say my entire career has always been about understanding people. Like it's always been about, seeing beyond just what is right there, right? Like so more of the vision, more of the audacity to go in and demand and ask for, the things that aren't like actually there and tangible in that moment. It's interesting because I was thinking one day that the process of this whole evolution of self, evolution of career, just evolution as a woman, sometimes we're so hard on ourselves. And I go back and I thought about my experience at Ohio State, where myself and she hired me when I was 18. She went on to become one of my closest friends and like a sister to me. And then I hired her later in life. But she and I were pulled from the bank that we were running while I was in college. And we were pulled to do a startup. It wasn't called that though. It's like, can you start this business for us? And it was 2 companies. And so the 2 of us on her living room floor built 2 companies. One was sold and one still exists to this day. And so you fast forward and sometimes you don't know why you're doing things in life. You just know to be present for it. And then I would have never assumed that 30 plus years later, I would be investing in early stage companies, right? And so being present for this journey is always something that I've enjoyed. I've always been able to pivot and evolve. But when you look at like Erica's background and you look at my background, yes, it's more of the audacity. It's more of I see no limits. I see no boundaries. I'm not doing a checklist. I want the vision. I'm going to challenge everyone on it. And most importantly for me, it's been, what do I want to create? And what do you want to create? Because you can create whatever you want. And so that's always been like kind of my perspective. I did have, the entrepreneur background. I think that it was interesting though, because even though I had that background, it was never I was in a cash business. So it was never so restrictive financially, right? And because we're talking about talent, it was always covered. Everything was always covered because the talent was actually the business model. And so then I had to be forced into a model that everything is like, no, you can't go to dinner. No, you can't do that, So just having all of these different experiences, for me, it's just been about how I evolve and grow too. And then I like to tell people all the time, I haven't arrived, right? Hopefully that's never the point. I keep going and growing. But I want to share the information with as many people as possible because I think that's actually what one of the differences is the access to information.
Well, you have said, and I think it's so true, and I want to get into that a little bit later, that many of our cultural problems, if not most or all of them, stem from financial issues, right? And that's a whole thing to unpack, which is also why I think what you just said about the way you work with people is so important. The sisterhood is so important. So the fact that you all are focusing at least 50% of the companies that you work on as women and minority owned is very key. When you said that you were hired by someone and then you hired them and then that trajectory, brings me so much joy because it made me realize in this exact moment that I hired a delightful person. One of the things I do is as I turn my books into IP sales, right? And I hired this delightful person to be in one of my books. And fast forward years later, she actually hired me for this podcast, Alison McGivna. So,
I love that.
she bought this podcast from me, and she was part of one of my first books. So I just think that's what's really amazing is you create these relationships and you have these intentions. And so when both of you are here together, both of you came into this venture as mothers. And it's interesting that Monique says that she comes from it's a cash first business, which for people who don't understand what that means, explain, Erica, because a lot of the companies that you're working with, there's no cash flow for years. Like there's an intent to build a business that will have profit, but not for some time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we do is, we are investing in companies when they're trying to get through the downward slope of what's called the J curve, right? So in finance, we have this thing called the J curve, which is that the company, sort of starts at zero, goes like way negative, and then hopefully eventually it goes up like that, right? So we're suffering all that pain, hoping that they're going to get, back above. And yeah, I mean, so one of the things that's so makes our job so meaningful, and why I think our partnership is really special, is that people underestimate the emotional toll and challenge that, investing with companies and supporting founders through this period can really take, right? Because in, nearly 100% of scenarios, the company is going to go through a challenging period. We've ended up with situations where that J curve never experienced, and they just shot up right away, and that's kind of like a miracle. And you're like, oh
The
my god, wow!
unicorn.
Like,
That's the unicorn, right?
Yeah, the
I mean,
unicorn.
but for all unicorns, right? So like, you have unicorns that go through that and then they eventually become unicorns, and it's very, very challenging. It's interesting because the CEO of Nvidia, which has got, the largest market cap in the world and, amazing successful company, was interviewed earlier this year, and, somebody asked him, knowing everything that you've gone through, would you still have started this company? And he said, no. He was like, no, it was actually so awful that, I don't care if the company's worth
I
$1
remember
trillion.
that
Like, it's
interview.
not, it's not worth it. So like, it's so funny because even when things are very successful, there's generally a lot of pain in the beginning. And, what I think makes our work so special is that, we try to, as people, as nurturers, as mothers, and as experts in our field, help founders manage that process as painlessly as possible, right? So to keep the company on track from a financial position, which is kind of like my main purview, is like, let's make sure they don't run out of money, to keeping them, together and whole from a mental and emotional perspective, which is a lot of the really hard work that Monique takes on, right? And then making sure that we can keep those things together so that they can, meet their vision and achieve their dreams. And, we do it with as little collateral damage as possible. So,
Oh
and
my
and
goodness, I love
I
this.
will.
So,
I'm sorry, Nancy. Go
no,
ahead.
but Monique, I'm so excited for you to jump. That's what I was going to say, because it's actually, I cannot believe Erica said the word nurturer, because I have that in my notes. It's just like, because as mamas, we're nurturers. As seed funders, early stage funders, you all are nurturers. And Monique, you've actually said that investing at this stage, a lot of people like to invest. They would rather take less of a possible share and invest later than invest earlier. It's because, like you said, it's very risky. Why is that? Why do people not like this nurturing seed phase?
Well, I mean, listen, less than 8% of companies survive, right? So it's just an investment concept, right? How much risk do you want to take on? And so for Erica and I think the combination of our background and just who we are as women, and yes, as mothers, both of us were mothers like earlier on. And so I think the reality is that taking our history, taking just who we are as women, most importantly, taking this concept of developing raw talent. What I was doing in the entertainment industry, in my opinion, is no different than what we're doing for early stage founders, right? It's raw talent. And I do think that, and Erica thought that there was something missing that you can't measure on a spreadsheet with algorithms, and that's the people component. And at this stage, we love this stage actually, because we have been able to see traumatized founders, nurture them and put up that bumper system and get them to their next round and the round after that. And so I think that there is something to be said of that practice that I think was very common early on in venture, of just investing in all things and just see which one wins, versus let's take a more strategic, intentional approach, fewer investments, We'll do venture the way it should have always been done, inclusively. We'll have inclusive teams, inclusive boards, inclusive support networks, and let's see if that changes. And it does. It changes everything. And I think that we take a more hands-on boutique approach, and it works for us, and we like the space that we play in.
That's so sweet. It's just, because it's like this again, because this is Mompreneurs, right? So anyone listening to this is likely someone who is a nurturer who understands sometimes people, you got to get people back up. You basically are kissing these companies' boo-boos. and
We
and you're
are.
sending them off into the world just like your kids, right? And because both of y'all have three kids, you have three different personalities. So between the two of y'all have a lot of experience in launching different kinds of people and understanding how to support them. But especially, and both of you I want to weigh in, why is it so important that you specifically focus on the communities that you focus on? Because I'm going to say a lot of times we need the seed support mentally and financially more than most because the opportunities are fewer and farther between. We don't have the education or the background to even know how to do the things that we are capable of doing.
Well, I mean, I think the statistics are just very obvious, right? Like, so I think it's still less than 3% of funding goes to women and people of color. So just automatically looking at founders and giving them access, as all founders should have had access, right? So having the ability to know that importance. Secondly, just, Eric and I learned very early on together, it's just the highest return of investment, right? Like diversity, inclusion, having access to deals that most people are not looking at. Well, that is a great investment, right? And so we're not out here competing for deals. We're out here looking at founders and companies that a lot of people just overlook or don't have access to. So I think that is, one of the things. And yeah, it's just the right thing to do.
Erica, weigh in on that. I love that because when we look at Black wealth in particular, oftentimes it's from things people didn't want to do, like parking lots, for example, the things that at the time weren't sexy. So when you say there's no competition for a lot of the deals you're doing, that does not mean there's not a lot of intrinsic value.
Well, I don't want to say there's no competition. No, that's no. What I was saying is that we're not out here competing for all those traditional deals that were, happen to come out of like traditional markets like a Silicon Valley, right? So I'm not saying that, yeah, no, our founders have options, but it's more about partnering with the right type of investor. But we're just not out here competing and bidding, I would say, against firms, right? Because why would we do that?
Yeah, Monique's right. So, our um, investment strategy, right, is for each fund, we'll invest in 18 to like maybe 20 companies. And that portfolio of companies is, built over the course of like 3, maximum 4 years. So each of those companies, we have to make a commitment to working pretty closely with them for the first few years of their existence, right? So, a lot of people, when they think about what we do and they think, oh, well, they're just investors, they're just writing a check, it's actually a lot more than that, right? So, we have to provide a lot of oversight. We take a board seat. We have to be available to support the founders as they're growing the company and also help them secure investment for the next round. So there's a lot of participation that goes on. The reason that we're able to win deals, right, and why we think we have an advantage in being offered the opportunity to invest versus other firms is that there are a lot of female founders out there, and there are a lot of founders of color, and there are very few female investors, and there are very few investors of color. Like, for example, if you're a female founder and you have a really exciting company and it's raising a seed round, and you're going to have to like break it to your investors that, hey, you're pregnant or you need to do some other responsibility that like women
Yes.
do every day. Are you going to prefer to work with a female founder who's been through that and understand it? Or are you going to pick some firm with a bunch of guys who are like, what are you talking about? You know,
Right, you can't have a child.
exactly. Like there are sort of a million little things that make it much more attractive to work with people who understand where you're coming from and who support you. Same thing, you know, there are very few Black owned VC firms in this country. And Black founders who are starting a business, you know, even the men will very often uh, find that, you know, they may get interest from the more traditional VC firms. But if the slightest thing goes wrong, you know, they're looking to exercise that power to take away control and, you know, maybe take over the companies. So, you know, there's a huge element of trust and relationship that goes into making investments that gives us a significant competitive advantage when we're making our first investment to get the type of ownership that we need to produce really great returns when these companies are successful. So that's what Monique means when we don't really like compete for deals, right? So, you know, more traditional like Series A VC firms, the way they'll describe making an investment is like, okay, you know, this company is in market and, you know, they had like 10 different term sheets and we were all like bidding for the deal and, you know, I won or I didn't win, right? For us, no, it's that we're getting to know founders early, we're building a relationship with them, and we're negotiating an investment terms that work for both sides and are mutually beneficial.
And you know, Nancy, the way it relates to parenting and being a mother, right, is that it's exactly that. We both have three children. They're all different. We have to parent them differently. Our founders, every company is different. Every founding team is different. What they need is different. And we have to kind of approach it in that way. So I see it just as an extension of just who we are as women and as mothers, regardless. And we feel very fortunate to have the companies that we do.
I love that. Absolutely. And I think what's really great, there's also the je ne sais quoi of, it's that cliche, if you can see it, you can be it, right? And if someone comes to you and they're like, I'm pregnant, am I going to be able to run my company? Or they know they're going to be able to run their company, but often the people investing in them might not know. Both of y'all know it'll just make you work harder. I mean, Monique, you were in college, single mom, right?
Yep.
You know, and Erica,
Yep.
you were a young mom, you know, and so like you know exactly motherhood does not make you lazy. Motherhood
No, it
inspires
does
you
not.
to go
It
out
does.
and secure the bag for your family.
It's a
Yeah.
different type of
Very well put, Nancy. Secure that bag for your family.
Well, I laugh because
and
even back in
also, you know,
go ahead.
you're looking at this little person who can't advocate for themselves and can't, you know, so you kind of have that responsibility. And I look at that. I look at the founders, like a lot of times they cannot advocate for themselves. And they have supportive investors like myself, like Erica, who can advocate for them because that's exactly what they need. They don't need people always telling them what they can't do. They need someone telling them what the possibility is.
Well, and also they need people telling them the subtle ways that they can just avoid a lot of pain. You know, I mean, so much like when you did Mama Teeny, Erica, for example, the
Yeah.
the knowledge you had, you were probably able to mitigate a lot of the things that you see perhaps the people that you invest in coming. Or how do you feel about being able to cut away a lot of the expensive, time-consuming mistakes that first gen founders is what I'll say, because my husband and I refer to us as entertainment immigrants, right? Because we're the first generation, so we made a lot of mistakes. But now our children are in the industry. They're doing great because we were able to cut away a lot of the crazy stuff that we just didn't understand back then. What are you able to help your founders avoid in their industries, in this world, as you help them to build their companies over the next few years?
Yeah, Nancy, that's a really good point. I mean, that's a big part of sort of the point of venture capitalists, right? And like why we exist, right? So our role, you know, beyond obviously like providing and managing capital for the company's growth is to share our experience and learnings, right? So if you think about our job, our job is to at any one time be working with like dozens of startups and seeing like what works for them and what doesn't. At the same time, we're also, you know, have relationships with like many other VCs that also have portfolios of many companies. And so we're kind of functioning as, a part of the system that has exposure to a lot of different things that have worked and things that haven't worked. And so we're able to sort of funnel that information along to our portfolio companies, founders, and, they'll either choose to use it or they won't. But helping them make good decisions on hiring, helping them make good decisions on pricing, helping them make good decisions on go to market, helping them, sort of understand what sort of the ultimate capitalization needs of their company is going to be, helping them understand what the market for selling the company looks like. So these are all things that we, basically our full-time job is like sharing that information with the founders as they need it and helping them make decision using perspective that like comes from outside of their companies. And I think it's particularly, becomes even more relevant in today's society as things move faster and change faster, right? So like, for example, when I started Mama Teeny, which was in 2008, right? Like very early kind of like YouTube days, I remember I went back to like my business school case studies and I pulled out the case study for Honest Tea, right? Which is a company founded by Seth Goldman. And it was like, literally printed out. And I kind of just copied everything that he did to start my tea company, right? But in a different manner. And it kind of worked, but YouTube had been invented. So, yeah, and I was doing D2C. And so we had to integrate some of those things. But even back then, if you looked at somebody who had been successful 2 years ago and kind of replicated their playbook, it would still work. Nowadays, if you look at something somebody did 6 months ago that was successful, it's not going to work today, right?
Yes.
So everything is very much in real time. You can't just go to the textbook, you can't just go to some historical account. And so, our role becomes even more valuable in trying to like keep a funnel of that real-time information for our founders.
That's so
And then
interesting. Monique is
also
very
on
much kind of, go ahead, please. So
No, no, please.
follow
No,
up
no,
on
no,
that because I was going to
no,
go
go
to
ahead.
you. Go. No, I was going to say because it's also it's kind of like it's like entertainment. Like yesterday's like hit thing is not today's hit thing. So you have to have an eye. You have to be prescient. It's kind of like I remember when I was selling my Black Santa children's book. There were no Black Santa children's book. The year my book came out, 30 others came out, right? So, but if I had been a year too late, it would, I'd have missed the boat. If it had been a year too early, we'd be like, what is this, right? You're in a similar boat when you're looking at these companies. You're often, it's kind of like in the entertainment industry, right? You're trying to like decode, like, okay, what zeitgeist are we going to hitch our horse to? And is it going to have legs?
Yes. So I will tell you that one of the other things that Rain Ventures does really well, and I'm really grateful that I have a partner who really accepts this part of me, because a lot of my success in the entertainment industry was not because I was ever paying attention to trends. I've never cared about trends. I'm more of a classic, what can be around and what would you want to listen to 25, 30, 100 years from now, right? And so a lot of that requires me to disconnect from a lot of information actually, right? And so a lot of that is me being present and going by gut and going by what feels right, what feels good. And, that's something that cannot be measured. And it's an emotional IQ that you have to have. And it's the ability to be present. It's the ability to be present in a conversation and to really understand and look beyond even just the word, hear beyond the words that they're saying, right? But really, really pay attention. And so Erica and I, we exercise that often. And it really does allow the flexibility to pay attention to the founder, what the customer potentially needs, and what feels right and feels good, where a lot of firms don't necessarily have that concept. And then the founders are put into like these pigeonholed ideas. And for me, coming from entertainment, once you start pigeonholing a creative, and I find us all to be creators, right? Like even if it's on the business side, we're still creating something. And you have to have that ability to create freely. When you start restricting that, it becomes really complicated. And even the exceptional talent sometimes don't make it through that. So our ability to allow creativity, our ability to not go with trends, but go with what is the right thing for the customer, what is the right thing for this founding team, I feel like really does add some different perspectives to our founders and to the companies that they're building. But yes, it is like entertainment because at the end of the day, you can do this project and then next month that project could not matter, right? So being able to also stand on it though and get founders and investors and the board to stand on and be convicted of what you actually say you believed in.
Yeah, and one of the things that's so interesting, that I've kind of observed about what we do, and I think it's a real sort of insight into just like how the world operates is, Monique and I work really well as an investing team because, we think incredibly differently, right? We have very different backgrounds and like really different thought processes. And so, the same founder, right, can be talking to both of us, on a Zoom, right? We're each in our little bubble. And like the things that I'm actually hearing and the things that Monique are hearing is totally different, right?
Yep.
Because everyone has like their own overlay, their own filter as to how they look at things and like what's actually going to like make it through to the final analysis. And, one of the issues with a lot of venture firms is that, they are generally comprised of partners that have like the same overlay and the same filter. And so they're kind of looking at everything in a really similar way. Whereas when you have sort of a greater sort of depth of perspectives, you can make much better decisions on who you actually want to invest in. And I think that's been, a big key to why we've been
Yep.
really successful because, as human beings, there's no one's able to absorb 100% of the information that is presented to them. You are only really like maybe absorbing like 15% or something at most, and then the 15% I'm absorbing and the 15% she's absorbing are like totally different ones.
Yep.
So it works really, really well for us to, be able to take that information, sort of bring it together and use it to construct a really successful portfolio.
Nancy, for me, since Eric and I have been partners, outside of just our partnership and our ability to have lasted this long and to go through, the great times, the complications, all the things, and still be standing here. But we had a founded a company that we were the lead investor in. And when one of the co-founders exited, they actually came and asked us if they could work for us because they really truly loved being and experiencing a different type of approach to venture because they did have a venture background. And so the fact that we're not just here as Erica and I, but that we're growing and that we're finding teammates that really believe in this very different approach to venture, but to have people who are familiar with venture, then we led their round and now they are partners at our firm. It means a lot to us.
And just like a relationship, this has been going strong for way longer than it's been public. You both have been investing in different companies for way before you started Rain Ventures in 2017. So a lot of this is building relationships and seeing the growth of you over time because that's how this works in this industry, right? You're trying to get, the people are trying to get money from you, but also a large part of what you do is getting money. So it's like money inception. Talk to us about the importance of working well with each other and presenting a united front so that companies see your strengths and they see your unique qualities as one worthy of being invested in.
I think for me, and when Eric and I first started like working together and going to meetings together, I think that authenticity was probably the most important perspective. Being authentic as to who we are as individuals, yes, speaking on the mission, the purpose, and what we wanted as a legacy for a firm was important. But what we learned is that people naturally see why we're partners. It's something that's typically brought up to us before we even address it. And so I think showing up as our authentic self and just staying true to that is why it works so well. And yes, we have been doing it for a long time. We have had to work through like conflict resolution. We have had to take times where we both needed to like really pay attention to each other and be more considerate, so we've done all the things, which is why it works so well with founders, right? It's like, yeah, we can tell you all that these are the pain points of partnership. But the other side of it is that you grow together, you learn together, and you become like, you really do you start relying on who each other are as individuals, and that becomes like the most beautiful experience. And so we've been able to relay that, and we actually created a course based on that concept of like, we have investors too, right? So it's not just the exhaustion of the founders who are fundraising, but Erica and I have to fundraise too. And it's not always like a really beautiful, positive experience. And so we came up with something called What is Venture Backed? Like, what does it mean to be venture backed? And a huge portion of the presentation and the conversation is around the fact that, hey, we have investors too, and here's what they require of us, which is why we're asking this of you. And so that also has kind of bridged that gap between investor, founder, our investor, and like understanding it as a whole ecosystem.
That's so important, Erica, because it's not like sometimes it can, because the numbers are large, and again, especially when you're doing C, especially when you're doing with first time entrepreneurs, the hard earned work to get that money isn't always, by the time it's not always clear. So I think that's really smart that you all created a presentation explaining. It's just like, where did I come from? What's happening to my body? Like, this is literally explaining the organic nature of VC and how there's layers before it actually trickles down to the company.
That's right. And, a lot of times the teams walk away like, okay, first of all, they're super excited because now they understand it a little bit differently. And then it also allows them to know they have access. It's not just the founders who have access to Erica and I, it's the founding team. It's anyone that needs support. We're here for them. But then more importantly, they understand like why it's important to report and note take. And because we actually need all this information, because the more that we can give, the more our LPs understand what's going on and what we're doing too. So it's been really good and positive feedback from them.
So what do you look for in a company? So we've talked all about what you can do for the company, how the companies are thriving, how it's important to help individuals who aren't necessarily well represented in VC and startups. When you are looking at companies to invest in, what tickles your fancy?
I'll let Erica start.
Yeah, sure. So, our fund strategy is to make relatively large investments in the round at which the company is raising like their first $3 million, right? So outside of that, we are not what's called like thesis driven. It's not like Monique and I, and some VCs do this, right? We don't get in a room in the beginning of the year and think about, oh, what are all the ideas that we have that we want to find someone who's doing them, right?
Right.
What we're actually doing is, we're looking for founders who are coming to us, hopefully with things that we've never been thought of, right? That are so innovative, so disruptive, it wouldn't have even crossed our mind. So, some funds are like, yeah, we're looking for fintech, we're looking for insurtech, we're looking for future of work. We will really look for anything that is scalable and capital efficient, right? And so the vast majority of companies that have both scalability and capital efficiency, which means like they don't need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in follow-on capital, tend to be technology companies, right? So software companies have sort of the highest operating leverage, right? Because like once you've built the software, your marginal cost of shipping it out to people is low. So consumer tech and business software makes up a large part of what we do. But, at our stage, like the thing that we're really looking for are people who we think have, unusual determination and really unique perspectives on a market that's not being properly addressed. So we like to talk about investing in technology companies that are at the nexus of culture and community, meaning that these founders might be able to organize a community or understand a culture in ways that people in the market currently do not. And they can use technology to deliver solutions to those groups more efficiently than has ever been done before. So that's really what we're looking for. And then, beyond that, it needs to be a company that we think has the potential to, reach a $1 billion valuation. That's generally the target. It doesn't always have to end up like that. The company could sell for 250 million or 500 million, and we would still recoup our investment. But we feel like we want to have confidence that every founder we're investing in has the potential to build a unicorn.
Yes. And then adding to that, Nancy, I would say that we do spend a lot of time pre-investment with founders. And, it's not just to measure like the professional side of them, but, how do they deal with tough conversations? How do they deal with problems and resolution of problem? How are they personally? Does the world overwhelm them? Is everything happening to them versus, I'm problem solving? And so these are a lot of the things that you just have to like get to know people. So a lot of it is not just the business model and like those typical diligence concepts, but also who is this person? Who are these people when it comes to like, can they build something regardless of the obstacles? Because guaranteed you're going to have obstacles.
Because you're with them for a long time, years, right? And so you have to
Very long
make
time.
sure that it's just like a child. You got to make sure that kid that you're bringing in intentionally new people into your family, and that can shake up the dynamic. And you want to make sure it's
Right.
adding positive things to your dynamic instead of taking away from what you have going on. When did you all realize that Rain Ventures was making good choices? Like, what's an anecdote you have that you can share where you say, you know what? We have an eye. We are on track. It doesn't have to be a sale necessarily, but just a growth moment or an exciting milestone.
Oh my goodness. So I think there's been lots of milestones, just because just like our founders have to be inspired, so do we, right? So we try to find those moments. I think the first close as an official fund was a moment for us. I know for me, and Erica, I think that I remember our earlier meetings where we were told, oh, we should start a foundation and do charity work. We shouldn't be trying to raise like a real fund. And so, like, the moment of us actually doing a first close, I think, especially with the type of LPs that we had, was a moment, right? Like, okay, actually, what we've done, what we're doing, and what we say we're going to keep building is actually a real thing. And real people actually believe in that the same way we believe in our founders. I think that the companies that we have in our portfolio, I think those founding teams, I think that seeing them through from A to B and B to C and like whatever that concept is, seeing them keep getting to over the next thing, I think has been very, very rewarding. I would love to tell you that it's just, oh, Eric and I are so amazing. We are. But I also believe that a lot of this is just the way it's supposed to be, right? I feel like we're two women who really had the audacity to do something. And because we really want to do this with integrity and treat people fairly and just do something different in venture and change the way even people look at venture, the purity of the heart is there. And I think with that comes all of the wins simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Nancy. I think for me, the number one indicator, and this is just part of my more analytical mind, is that, you know,
She's like, I got integrity. She's like, I got receipts. Like,
Yeah.
Right. See, this is why we work so well
So
together, right?
yeah, so I would say number one, we've performed in the top 5% of all of the venture firms in our fund vintage. So if you take, all the funds that closed in 2021, our returns are in the top 5%, which is
Wow.
really,
And that's a
outstanding
really big
performance.
deal. So yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a huge deal. That's really
yeah.
impressive.
And then
But
I would
it's also
say,
impressive that y'all are doing it with integrity too, Monique. That's great too. Like, go
right,
ahead.
and then I would say the second one is that one of our current portfolio company founders who, does not have a lot of money by any means, has, maybe taken a small amount of secondary liquidity, but really just kind of enough for, basic to support his family. Asked if he could be an LP in our second fund, which I was like, "Oh, really? You want to put your money with us? Okay." I mean, that's like that's a very positive
That's as good
signal.
as it gets. Yes.
Yeah, that the founders want to take that they've sold a stake in their company and they want to take that money and put it into our fund
I
is
love
like
it.
very positive.
That's so
And then,
sweet.
yeah, and then I would say thirdly, which, Monique brought up earlier, is that, we had a co-founder from one of our portfolio companies where when she left that company, she wanted to join us. So that's a very similar indicator that, folks that we've worked with, like, are really behind the work that we do. So
Yes.
I think those are markers of success.
That's incredible. I love all of those.
I would also say though that even historically, if we look at like first time funds, we actually like just all together when you think of like the legacy institutions that are huge institutions now, not very many of them, if at all any of them, had like major success in their first fund. And so it just, when this work gets really, really hard, it's just a nice reminder that, okay, it's not easy. And there's days where this is a little complicated, and there's days where it's overly complicated, but we're doing something right and for the right reasons. And so it feels good.
It's so great. And look, considering, I mean, would you argue, are you in the league where you're in the top 5%? How many of those funds are run by two moms of color?
Probably, I don't know. It could be close to just us, but I think also there are only, a handful of, of venture firms that are run by Black women, period, in the country. So it's
Okay.
probably fewer than 10.
Yes, 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 this is very true. And I would also even add to your list of things that make you proud is it's also a family affair, right, Erica? Your son is working for one of the companies that y'all invest in.
Yeah, 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 which has been great. I was always saying if I'm gonna have to, if the kid that I invested all this time and energy and money in putting through school is gonna have to work somewhere for low pay, it better that it's somewhere where we're we're benefiting from it. So,
No, no,
He's so
because
amazing
that's
at
the
his
whole point.
job too.
yeah.
Oh, I love it. And I
No,
think
and
I think one.
we've been thrilled. I mean, I think we have been really lucky, that one of the things, that I appreciate that's an outcome of the work that we do, and beyond, Devin's job or whatever, but it's a huge deal, especially in this socioeconomic climate and this political climate, to be an integral part of starting companies that are creating good jobs with strong, positive culture for people, where they can grow and, develop wealth and, basically like we're making a small impact on a big world. But, when we think about the lack of empathy and, sometimes psychopathy of folks who are running a lot of the largest corporations in America, having people who are helping to birth new companies with management teams that have integrity, that care about community, that care about, their employees. I think that, that is a multiplier on the impact of the work that we do. And we're grateful
It's
for
so
those
key.
founders.
It's so key, and especially because it gets back to what we tapped on just a little bit earlier, Monique, but I want to for you to say a little bit more. Having these opportunities is so key because you've said most, if not all, which I fully agree, of our cultural issues stem from financial. Unpack that and unpack how that relates to what Erica just said and what you all are trying to do.
Ooh, that's a huge undertaking, right? I think
In
that
30 seconds or less.
here's what I'll say is that understanding historical fact is important. But for me and for Rain Ventures, understanding how to execute the solution has been more of a priority for us than continuing to state the problem. So if statistically, if you look at what our investments look like, heavy women, heavy people of color, right? And so for us, it's more about just doing the work. The other side of it is that if the nation's GDP is over 70% venture-backed companies, well, then the other side of it is exactly what Erica spoke about. We have to build billion-dollar companies, right? Yes, the micro is important, but most importantly is the macro concept. And we have to approach it in that way, which is why we encourage founders and invest in founders that want to build billion-dollar companies, because that is the change that we'll have to see to change any of these gaps.
That's incredible because when you have a billion-dollar company, you also are hiring a bunch of people to make that billion-dollar company run.
Right, exactly. The job profiles, the boardroom changes, like everything changes. And, it's not to then go repeat anything. It's to be the leader of the example of how things were always meant to be.
And as leaders that are coming up into this world, Erica, how does it feel to have gone from working for these funds and these firms to being an investor, to being a mom, and now to be in the position you're in with this esteemed firm that is continuing to grow and gain even more traction? What does it feel like when you enter into these rooms and you are the change that you were hoping to see when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I don't think I really like look at it necessarily that way. I kind of just feel like, listen, I'm still just waking up every morning and, trying to do as much good work as I possibly can. And, I mean, I think that's the other thing too, is that, you know, people don't appreciate enough that, like, listen, running a venture capital firm is like all VC firms are like very like owned and operated by the partners, right? So, we're here like just doing all of the work, right? And I say, I mean, it's definitely a job because even though it's our firm, like technically we're hired by our LPs to deploy their capital. So we always think about it in that way, which
You
is,
have
you know,
bosses. They just
and
are unofficial
we have to make
bosses.
sure that we get rehired like every few years for the next fund, basically. Like that's essentially the truth, right? But I always say, I mean, I feel like number one, I feel like we're really blessed because I personally think this is the best job in the world, but it's
Yeah.
really not a job. It's kind of a lifestyle, right? So like, this is the type of thing where it's just like, once you're in it, like it's all consuming, like everything that you do, like every single thing is related to building those relationships, exposing yourself to more of the ideas that are important for your founders to know about, supporting your founders. So it's really wonderful because, you know, everything we do is sort of like it's a very holistic way of living your life, kind of in service of this objective of, being what's hopefully a really positive part of our uh, economic, capitalistic economic system, right? And so, where Monique and I are really, I think having an important impact in reversing, some of the problems, right, that we've been saddled with from, centuries of discrimination, is, sort of opening up that aperture a little bit to more women, to more people of color, to allow more founders to know that, like, hey, no one's saying that, oh, the odds are that I'm going to be able to raise capital for Monique and Erica, but at least I know there's an option there. And so let me now live my life knowing that, like, this is a possibility, and I can kind of see that, that is in the opportunity set of things that I can execute on. And, so for us, like, that is a really important way to, sort of multiply the effect of, the work that we can do, right? Which is that we're not trying to raise, like, multi-billion AUM funds, right? Like, we operate in seed, with a reasonable number of portfolio companies, with a reasonable amount of capital. Like, that is our portfolio construction and sort of the way our investment strategy works. But beyond, the impact of that money in those companies that we choose to work with, I think we're changing the way thousands, even millions of Black women, and, founders of color, underrepresented founders view the chance, that they can make their dreams happen, right? I feel like it's just opening up that possibility on a greater scale.
You are. We 100% are. And for people who are listening or watching, it's like, you've opened up my eyes. How can I get in bed with Rain Ventures? Tell us where everyone can find you to, not just to pitch necessarily, but also to just follow you and see what is happening with you and your companies.
Well, our website is, Rain VC, so REIGNVC.com. My, I'm on the different digital platforms. I don't know that I spend a quality amount of time on them, but, I'm Monique Idlett on Instagram. I think on Twitter, I'm like Monique_Mosley, I believe. We do have a Instagram for Rain Ventures, and I think it's like Rain REIGN_Ventures or something like that for Instagram.
Monique told you about our website. We do have some socials for the firm. Neither of us are super active on social. You can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. That's the place I'm most likely to post. You can also follow me on Instagram. Same thing. I'm not super active on Instagram. And I don't know, especially after, like, Mark Zuckerberg's, recent behavior, I'm like, do I even want to keep Instagram? I don't know. We'll see.
I think I'm over all of these platforms.
Yeah.
That's a whole other, yes.
Instagram is at the real Erica Duignan, and I also have a little bit of sort of educational content on TikTok, which is at real Erica Duignan. So you can look at that as well. And we also have a YouTube channel, which we haven't added a lot of stuff to recently. In fact, Nancy,
we are in
maybe see if we can
2025.
post.
Though. Yeah,
we'll post. Maybe we'll post this interview to our YouTube as well.
Yes, absolutely.
The Rain Ventures YouTube has a lot of educational content and videos. So if you're interested in, like, learning more about VC, learning more about the way investors think about opportunities, learning more about how to raise startup capital, you'll find a very deep library of material on our YouTube.
I love it. And Rain Ventures is, of course, named after your baby girl, Monique, which is the most mamapreneur thing you could possibly do.
Well, listen, let me tell you something. I cannot give myself credit for that. That was actually Erica's idea. Erica said, you know what? We should name this Rain. And of course, because we were talking about all the things that matter to us, and it kind of did just make sense to name it what my daughter's name is, because there was a reason why I gave her that name. And so, but Erica's the one that said we should have it as a firm name. So I feel like it was one of the best decisions we made as, like, a company title.
That is so great. Great job, Erica. And great job, you too. Thank you so
Nancy,
much.
Before we go, I definitely, because this is a mompreneur audience, one of my favorite quotes that I always say, and all the people that know me are tired of hearing of it, but I actually read it every day to myself, just as a reminder. And it's a Maya Angelou quote, and it's, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." And, I feel like as women, as mothers, as all of these different career paths that we go on, we have to allow ourselves this idea of evolution of self and know that the stages don't always look beautiful, but it comes out to a beautiful ending. And then you just keep growing. And so I think that is something that could really land well with your audience to remind themselves of.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's where how all of us end up here. And it's why I do this podcast. And you two are such shining lights and such incredible examples of just keeping putting one foot for another. Another Maya Angelou quote I love is, when you know better, you do better.
Yep.
And that's what each of us are over here doing, and encouraging our audiences to do the same. So thank you so much for being here with us. There's so
Thank
much
you
more we
for
could have talked
Thank
about.
you, Nancy.
But
I was so thrilled to have the chance to talk with you today. We really appreciate you. And
Yeah, we
this was a
do.
lot of fun.
oh, we appreciate you too. And of course, we appreciate all you listening and watching. Thank you so much. And as a reminder, Mompreneurs has a brand new episode that comes out live every Monday on Urban One Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit urban1podcast.com to learn more. That's urban1podcasts.com. Mompreneurs is brought to you by the Urban One Podcast Network and MadameNoire. Created, produced, and hosted by me, Nancy Red. Executive produced by Allison McGovna and Tanya Hoffler-Moore. Produced and edited by Jiminique Miller.